my name's Amanda and welcome to part 1 of my Quilt-Along-With-Me series. In this first video I will be introducing you to the block that we will be making, as well as how to prepare for all of the 4 blocks that you will be making, as well as how to piece the block together. So the block that I've chosen for this quilt is called the Father's Choice block, and you can sort of see it here in the background, but there's also a better picture on the screen for you now. So the quilt that we will be making will be made up of 4 of these blocks. These blocks are pretty big. They measure about 23 inches, well that's about 58.9 centimeters or something. So it's a really big block, and once you piece all 4 of them together, we're getting to a quilt that's, you know, a good lap size quilt. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I had never heard of this block before. It sort of caught my eye when I was sort of flicking through my blocks book, and I thought that is perfect. So I blew up the measurements to then create it into the block that we will be making together. If you're a beginner and you're looking at this block and thinking, wow, that looks really quite hard, it really is quite simple to piece together, and it's a block where you will be learning how to cut out basic squares, how to make basic half square triangles, and then also learning how to trim down units to then make it into a nice faultless block. With this video comes an information sheet that is full of all the details that you need to know to make this block. It's not the full pattern to the quilt just yet. I'm going to leave that to the end so that I can sort of collate all of the information of the next few videos and have it all just in one pattern at the end. So of course, if you're going to follow along with this series, print off the information sheet so you can make the block with me. And I would also encourage you to read through that information sheet before maybe watching the rest of this video, just so you sort of don't get confused in parts where I start explaining how to cut lots of things. So now that I've sort of explained all of that sort of bit, let's get into how to prep for this block. So I've chosen to use just only 2 fabrics for the quilt top. I'm using this really lovely geometric print that just totally stole my eye when I saw it in the store the other day. I thought that's absolutely perfect. And I'm also just going to pair it with a really plain white homespun or solid, whatever you want to call it, and I just think both of them together are just a magic pairing. Now of course you are more than welcome to use more than one fabric. You don't have to do what I've done. You can use a different fabric for each of the 4 blocks. You can use 2 contrasting fabrics. You can do pretty much anything you want. I've made sure to list how much fabric you need for both options, so if you want to do that, then it's all there in the pattern sheet. So because I'm only using 2 fabrics for my quilt top, the print fabric I bought just over a meter of fabric, and then for the white fabric I bought 2 meters. That will be used for the block and also the sashing, which is the next video. So the way that I like to prep my fabrics is I give them a really good steamy type iron first to just get rid of all of the creases, all of the lumps and bumps, and just to make sure that the fabric is nice and straight and crinkle free, and it will just make your life a whole lot easier if you just spend a little bit of time doing that. So once I've ironed them, I take them over to my cutting table and I fold them in half so the selvages are nice and straight against each other, and then I fold it in half again so that it's easier to cut. And then just simply repeat the same step for all of the other fabrics that you will be using as well. So before I cut my fabric, I like to cut a nice straight edge along the side that I'll be cutting from. For me, it is on my right hand side of the folded fabric. So to do this, I place the uneven edge past the first line on my cutting mat and then trim off as little as I need to get a nice straight line. And then once I have that nice clean edge, it's time to start cutting. So when it comes to cutting out the pieces, you can either cut out 1 block per time if that's what you feel comfortable with, or you can sort of just cut out all of the pieces for all 4 blocks at the one time, and that's what I'm going to go through now. And like I said at the start, all of the measurements and cutting instructions will be in the pattern sheet. So if this next bit sort of confuses you a bit and I kind of lose you, look back at that pattern and it will tell you everything that you need to know. So starting with the print fabric, you'll need to cut 5 5-inch strips across the width of the fabric, and then 3 5.5-inch strips as well. So the method that I use to make sure that I cut nice straight even strips is I line up the folded fabric against the grid lines on the right hand side and along the bottom of the mat. I place my ruler on top and count 5 inches from right to left. positioning my ruler so that it lines up on the 5-inch line. I also make sure that the lines on the ruler are running horizontal along the bottom folded edge of the fabric. Once I'm happy with the position and everything looks straight, I'll cut the strip with my rotary blade. I'll then do exactly the same method when I'm cutting out the 5.5-inch strips, but of course I'm just adding on an extra 1/2 inch to my counting. So then after cutting the 5-inch strips, the next step is to cross cut them into squares. Simply do this by opening the fabric out so it's only folded over once, and then cut off the selvage, creating a clean straight edge to work from. Count out the correct measurement and cut out 2 squares at a time. For the 5-inch strips, you should get 8 5-inch squares out of each strip, and then 3 5.5-inch squares from the 5.5-inch strips. So that in the end you should have 36 5-inch squares and 16 5.5-inch squares. The 5.5-inch squares will be made into half square triangles. And then with the white fabric, you just need to pretty much cut exactly the same thing, but you only need to cut 4 5-inch strips and cross-cutting them into 32 5-inch squares. And then cut the same 3 5.5-inch strips and cross-cut them into 16 5.5-inch squares. Now again, I'll say if you did not follow that at all, print off the pattern sheet and it is all there for you to read and to understand a lot better than what you may have just then. So next, let's go through how to make all of the half square triangles. I'm going to show you how to make all 32 half square triangles because I'm doing the same fabric for the whole quilt. But of course, if you're doing one color at a time, just do your half square triangles one block at a time. Pretty much just do it any way that you feel comfortable doing it. So in the usual fashion, just simply mark a line using a ruler and pencil down the middle of each of the 5.5-inch squares. This time it's the white one because it's the lightest fabric. Next, pair each of these with a 5.5-inch print square and pin them in place. Next, take your pile of pinned squares to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch line along the left hand side of the center line. Gently feed the next pair through and then the next until all of the squares have been chain stitched together. Remove the line of squares from the sewing machine, turn it around and begin sewing a 1/4 inch line down the other side of the lead line until you reach the end. Snip the threads that join the squares and with a ruler and blade cut the squares in half along the pencil line, resulting in 32 half square triangles. Next, the half square triangles need to be pressed, and for this I place my iron settings between cotton and wool and then have the steam on about half so that I don't burn my fingertips on any excess steam. When I press, I set the seam first, which just helps to anchor the thread into the fabric a little bit more. Then I open out the unit and press the seam to the darker side of fabric. Do the exact same thing to all 32 half square triangles. So the final step in making the half square triangles is to trim them down to a perfect 5-inch square. And to do this I use a set square. Because I don't have an actual 5-inch set square, I've placed tape along the 5-inch lines on the back of the ruler so that I can get an accurate cut every time. So to trim the squares down, I line up the 45-degree line across the center seam, ensuring the unit is square with the tape lines along the left hand side and along the bottom. Using a small rotary blade, I then carefully trim off any excess. I then spin the block around and do the same thing with the other 2 edges, resulting in a perfect 5-inch half square triangle. So now that all of our prep is done, it is time to start piecing this block together. Hopefully I haven't lost you by now. Thumbs up and gold star to you if you're still here. This next bit is always my favorite and I hope it's yours as well. So I'm just going to show you how to piece just one block together. Of course, the quilt is made up of 4 blocks, so I'm just going to leave it up to you to piece together the other 3 in your own time. Now, because this block is quite big, I actually had to film the layout on my design wall, and because my design wall is white and I'm using white fabric, it's sort of hard to see some of the squares, so I do apologize if you can't quite sort of grasp the block coming together, but you will over time. Don't worry, it's just the way that it is. I have to read this bit, sorry. Each block is made up of 9 5-inch print squares, 8 5-inch white squares and 8 half square triangle units. So to begin the layout, first place a print square in the center and build around it a 9 patch type design. using 5 print squares and 4 white squares. Add 4 print squares next to each of the white squares along the outside, then place 2 half square triangle units with the print sides facing into each other and finishing it with a white square in the corner. And again, you will find a clearer diagram of the block layout in the pattern sheet, so print it off. Please print it off. So the way that you choose to piece this block together is completely up to you. I want to encourage you to piece it together in the way that you feel comfortable doing. So if that means row by row, or you want to do it in pairs and then piece them all together, do it that way. That is totally fine. But I'm going to show you how I like to do it. I like to piece this block in sections. So I kind of divide it into corner sections, and then I do like a middle row, and then I do like a sashing bit. It could be a little bit confusing if you're beginning or you haven't really done sort of piecing that way. I just find that when I'm piecing it this way, I can sort of control the way the seams go, and I can get really nice sort of seam joins, and everything sort of nests the right way. I just really like doing it that way. But of course, you don't have to do it this way. Do it the way that you feel comfortable doing. So the way that I like to first start piecing this block together is by taking one corner section at a time and pairing the squares together. I then sew a 1/4 inch seam down one pinned edge, chain stitching the next pair through. The joining threads are then snipped, and then I press the center seams away from the half square triangle unit to eliminate any excess bulk. I place the 2 rows back in to the right place. I flip one on top of the other, nesting the center seam and pinning the edge securely into place. I then sew a 1/4 inch seam down this side, removing the pins as I go. To finish this section, I press the seam I've just sewn towards the side that has more darker fabric on it. So towards the side with the print square. I then add this block back to the layout and then do exactly the same thing with the other 3 corner sections. So moving on, I then piece together the 2 squares that separate the corner sections in the top and bottom row. After pinning them together, I sew a 1/4 inch seam down the edge and then simply press the seam towards the darker side of fabric. I then do exactly the same thing with the other 2 squares that separate the 2 corner sections on the top row. So next it's time to piece all of the sections into 3 different rows. I first take the top row of units and lay it out on my table. Then I flip the centered duo squares onto one of the corner sections. I nest the center seam and pin the edge securely into place. I then sew a 1/4 inch seam along the pinned edge, taking it to the ironing board and pressing the seam towards the 2 center squares. Next, I lay the row back out on the table and flip the other corner section onto the other side of the center duo, nesting the seams and pinning it in place. At the sewing machine, I sew another 1/4 inch seam along the edge, then press the seam inwards towards the center duo. And after placing the row back on to the wall, I do exactly the same thing with the bottom row. Then to piece together the middle row, I simply sew each square together, side by side, from left to right. Then I press each of the seams outwards from the center. And now we finally come to piecing all of the rows together to make our block. To do this, I always like to start from the bottom upwards. I don't know why, it's just the way that I work. So with the bottom and middle row laid out on the table, I flip the middle row over, and if I've pressed everything in the right way, all of my seams along the top edge should nest together. And they do, which is great. And just like I've been doing with all the other piecing, I pin the edge securely in place before taking it to the sewing machine, where I carefully take my time to sew a 1/4 inch seam down the pinned edge. Then the seam I've just sewn is pressed towards the middle row where there are less bulky seams. And then to piece out the top row, I lay out the rows I've just sewn onto the table and place the top row next to it in the right position. I flip the top row over and nest all of the seams in the correct place, pinning the edge just like before. I sew my last 1/4 inch seam in the construction of this block in the same way as before, and then press this seam inwards again towards the middle row. And that is your block pretty much finished. Yay! And of course, if you need to, trim down the block so that it measures 23 inches. And then of course do that again another 3 times and you will have all 4 blocks that make up this quilt top done. Yay! So I'm going to stress again that if you found it really hard to follow my direction in this video, please download and print out the pattern, as it has more simplified instructions of how to piece the block together in comparison to this video. Now of course, if you're going to give this block a go and you have questions about the piecing, about cutting, about the prep, anything, please comment down below and I will definitely answer you and help you along with understanding how to make the block. Before I go, I would like to just say a big thank you to everyone who has commented saying that they are so excited for this series and are going to quilt along with me. I really thought no one would do it, and all of your lovely comments have really just encouraged me, and I don't know, it just made me feel really kind of happy. Which is a good thing, I guess. I also like that you guys have said that you're going to be quilting along with me, because it puts pressure on me to get stuff done, because I'm a terrible procrastinator. So thank you so much for letting me know that you're going to join in, and I'm so excited to see the blocks that you come up with and the fabrics that you use and how creative you're going to be with this. I'm just so excited. So in the next video I'm going to be showing you how to sash and piece all of the blocks together to then have a completed quilt top. Yeah! And of course there will be another pattern sheet to go with that video telling you how much fabric that you need, as well as all of the steps and instructions and everything like that. So again, the link for the pattern is down in the description below. It's a PDF that you can easily download and print off. Give it a really good read before you attempt anything. Just take your time with the block, be patient, learn from it, make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes because we learn from them, and yeah, just have fun with it. If you're new to my channel and would like to see more of the things that I do here, and would also like to see the next part of this series, subscribe and it will pop up in your feed and you can watch it. Yeah! And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you another time very soon. Bye! Have fun making!